Hi everyone. I'm just very quickly trying to sort out the connection between Zoom and YouTube seems to be messing about for whatever reason today. So I'm just uh oh, it's fixed itself now, or at least it says that it's streaming, even though it gave me an error message. So never mind. Hello everybody. I hope you're doing okay. Hope that everything is good. I'm just gonna make sure that I take a picture of what the error is. So give me 1 second. There we go. Excellent, brilliant. We can investigate these pesky little pesky little things that happens with live streams. Hey Steve, how are you? Welcome Paul, welcome Beta. Hi Marian from Malta, how are you doing? Hi Dominic. Thank you so much, and thank you for your emails, by the way. Welcome Lisa from Utah. How is everyone feeling? Hope you're all doing really good. Welcome Eunice, how are you? Thank you so much. And thank you everybody that's just arriving into the chat. You are very, very welcome to be here. We still have about 3 minutes until we get started, or actually just two now. So, make yourselves comfortable. Feel free to use the chat. It's going to be open now for a little while. So feel free to say hi and how you're doing and all of those things. And then we'll be starting, like I said, in just under two minutes. Hey, Linda, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Helen, it must be very early for you. Bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey, Alice, how is Scotland? Today it's actually been all right in Southampton. So I don't know if the rest of the UK is doing more or less all right. So I hope that you're all, comfortable at home, that you're doing good. And if any of you have been celebrating anything recently, well, happy holidays. Especially if you've been celebrating Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah. And anything else, of course, in the meantime, very, very happy holidays to you all. 12 degrees is reasonable, right, Steve? I mean, I think 12 degrees is reasonable in comparison to the -2 that I had a week ago. I'm fine. Hey, Esrith, how are you doing? Thank you so much for being here. Bless you. 6 o'clock in the morning, Helen. Wow. Much respect to you. Thank you so much. How is Florida, Esrith? I suspect very nice and sunny. It should be -12 and snow. Steve, no, hold until the new year at least. I hope that we can endure at least a few more weeks. Hey, Kate, how are you doing? Lovely. Nice. That sounds great in Virginia. No sun and very windy. Well, sometimes it's gotta be a shrift. The weather has to move around. It cannot always be sunny in Florida, but Hey, Dolores, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us from Toronto. Hi, everybody that's just been joining the stream. Hope you're doing good. And we are starting in literally just about 30 seconds. So no worries at all. It is still warm. Well, there you go. Warm still is reasonable. We will accept that. Excellent. Well, we are, according to my phone, just about to start the talk today. So let me just make sure that I have the PowerPoint up, because I had it in front of me. Then I closed it because I thought I had just be done with it. And then I had to open it again. So here we are. Excited to learn the last bit of the Norman world. Well, I'm glad that you are, because today we are contextualizing and putting points across from the different worlds that perhaps we've not talked all that much about in the other sessions, that I think would help you sort of make these Norman worlds a bit more tangible and sort of revise a few of the things that we've been speaking about for the last couple of weeks. And yes, there is a quiz, of course, but remember that the quiz at the end of the course is always just on questions, things that we have covered in class, yes or yes. And it's always either a multiple choice or a true or false answer. So it should be relatively straightforward. I promise I've not made anything super tricky. So hopefully you will not be mad at me, and then you will get your certification of completion. Well, it's time to get started. So, hi everybody, hope you're doing really good. And if this is your very first time joining us here in World Virtual Tours, well, welcome to this space. My name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, and it is doctor because I do have a PhD in history from the University of Winchester. And in fact, well, the Norman world and everything that we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks has been part of my studies since 2010. So for 14 years now, blimey. That seems like a really long time when I say it out loud. Well, today is the last of the sessions for the Free Academy of me and of this year. So thank you so much, everybody that has participated. It's been a super fun project, and we have so much more coming on. So, thanks for enabling us to do this. And on that note as well, thank you so much for attending all of the tours, all of the talks, and keeping World Virtual Tours going. As you may know, and it's now on the chat for all of you to see, the project of World Virtual Tours and the Free Academy as well is all supported through the donations that you can do through PayPal and Stripe. So the links are in there. If at any point PayPal or Stripe give you trouble, just contact us or the organizers, and they'll be able to fix it for you ASAP. And you also have in there the calendar for the upcoming tours and the things that I'm doing. So before we finish the year, you have 3 more sessions with me. One of them is this Sunday. We are finishing the Golden Age of Spain. So this week we're finishing lots of things. And then the last week, just before the year ends, on the 28th, we're going to Lisbon on a recorded talk. And then we are going to do the history of the United Kingdom in under 1 hour on the 30th. So if you're around for those, I'll be waiting for you there. And very soon you should be able to see as well the program for next year, which means in January, I'm going to take you to London and to Malta. So I hope that you're looking forward to those. And well, on that note, and before we get started properly with the PowerPoint, as I've been doing for the last few sessions, I wanted to leave the chat open for a few more minutes in case that you had any specific questions about last week, the Normans in Italy, or any of the other sessions, anything about the Normans that may have come to your mind, that you may want a bit more clarification, or something that maybe I've not mentioned in class and you've been thinking about recently, like I often do. feel very free to ask away before we get started with the actual overall session today. So the chat will remain open, like I said, for a few more minutes, so you can get some of those initial questions out of the way. And also, in case that you did some reflection about the question that I left for you guys last week about the Normans, and what what about them, what does it make them be Normans, why, how, what do you feel are some of those common characteristics that actually makes Norman identity a thing? So I'm just gonna grab some water in the interim period so you can fire away in case you have any questions, and after that we will crack on with the session today. So as usual, don't be shy. There is no question too big or too small. So even if it's something we've covered or whatever, doesn't matter. I never mind repeating myself. So go ahead, and I'll have a little link. Kate, you missed the first webinar. Will it be on YouTube? It was on YouTube, but I believe the replay may have expired. If you may, please contact World Virtual Tours, either with the email for this or in general our contact inbox, and they will be able to sort out that query for you, because I know that they were expiring, all of the replays, but I'm not entirely sure when. I was under the impression that it may have expired already, but it could still be on YouTube. So if you cannot find it, like I said, just contact directly World Virtual Tours. At the end of this tour, you will receive an email with a notification to say thank you and all of this stuff. And you're always very welcome to reply and ask directly. So that's one. And by the way, for those of you who were waiting for a long time for the reading list, I have a reading list for you guys here it is in by no means the full thing. For the Normans, I probably have a Word document that is about 10 pages long worth of books. So, but I have that today, so that will be answered today as well. Oh, and there you go. So as Ruth still has the link to the first session. So if you have any of them to to still catch up with, make sure that you do it shortly, because I honestly I thought they may have finished already. I had it on my mind. It was the middle of December, which I suspect that will be tomorrow. But anyway, do make sure that you check them. Dominic, the power of adaptation to new surroundings is still very well. I very much agree with that, Dominic. I think that over the last 3 weeks, what we have kind of seen always is exactly that the Normans, wherever they go, they find a way. Where there is a will, there is a way. And sometimes that requires some adaptation, sometimes that requires some straightforward opportunism or whatever may be, but they do have that ability to just mold themselves to the surroundings, but I think without losing their core in many ways, or perhaps adapting their core to the new surroundings so that it's something new but still with an item of the old, or at least I believe that to be the case. Perhaps someone else may interpret it in a different way, but I think that is a real key to their success. The fact that wherever they went, whatever they did, they always found a way of doing it that worked out for them and often for those around them, which is what gives them a lot of leverage. I see. Oh, excellent. Good. Well, that's good to know, Asrith, because I wasn't entirely sure, and someone else asked me over email. So now that I know that for sure, then we can be in the clear. Awesome. Any more questions? Any more reflections on the Normans? What is the essential origin of culture of the Normans? Well, Eunice, again, this could be very much open to interpretation, and it's one of those things that I think perhaps part of today's lecture will answer, but I generally think that at the core of the very origin of Norman culture, there is still that sense of Norse survival. I think that's one of the reasons why the Normans overall are so adaptable, because, the very reason why they exist in Normandy is due to their desire to find new ventures and find a new way of existing and coexisting in a land that is completely, foreign to them. So I think it's that, not just desire of survival, but a sense of adventure as well. I think that's also the reason why the Normans are quite prone to go places, discover new ways of doing things, getting involved in the Crusades, right? We've not spoken all that much about the Crusades, other than perhaps last week, but many different characters that we've spoken about got involved in this general activity. And I think you wouldn't necessarily do it if you were just a very pious or religious person, if you see what I mean. I think there's something about, your sense of honor, duty, whatever you want to call it, that definitely has something to do with it. Tess, will you be letting us know how to enter our responses? Yes, you will be getting an email test, so it will all be pretty straightforward. So no worries at all. Steve, the Normans were adventurous people, yes, of Norse traditions. We travel. Yep, I think that is a very, very thorough answer, Steve, and I agree with all of the above, particularly the part of working with others, because as much as they can get a bad rep, particularly in England, I feel, or as we saw, for example, in Italy with the Pope and the Battle of Civitate sul Fortore, they do appreciate that they cannot just go, you know, spreading death everywhere, that there is a give and take. And the ability to mingle with the locals eventually is what allows them to, I think, survive. But, well, that's some existential questions that we have answered today about the Normans, and that I genuinely think are probably the essence of their core. But we are about to start sharing this now a bit more. So I will close the chat for now so we can engage with the proper lecture, and then I'll open it again. The Etruscan and the Norman are not definite as people of certain cultures. Well, they do have been redefined as that now, Eunice. At least some of us historians believe that to be the case. But there is, it's one of those things, words sometimes can be a bit tricky. And the issue is that, putting labels over them can be difficult. For all the bad rap Normans having, indeed, that 100% Beverly, I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Well, like I said, we're just going to start with the contextual part of the lecture today. And I think that some of the things that I want to tackle here today may allow you to answer some of these questions better, or maybe just, give you a general sense of being. Because we've been focusing a lot on the different regions without necessarily always establishing, the connections between them, the best that we could, or at least, well, I feel that we were definitely, focused on the geographical part of it, which was definitely my intent. So just a very brief recap using this huge map, just so we can see where the journey begins, the places that they went. And as you can see through the map, we've not really covered everywhere. I was just speaking really the three main areas where their powers, fully develop, but it's a lot more complicated than that. There are many other areas. So as we have here from the red, that's the Duchy of Normandy. This is the very moment where Duke Rollo of Normandy, or Count Rollo at the time, will actually settle roots and move forward in 911. You have in there, I think you can see, because some of the text can be a little bit small, but the moment where the, I guess, independence of Normandy ends is in the 13th century, where Philip II of France actually takes over, properly speaking, and Normandy is no longer a vassal or a separate kingdom. It gets taken back into the general Kingdom of France. Then, of course, we have the conquest of England in 1066 and how all of that develops over into the rest of the British Isles. Because remember, it wasn't just England. We would have territory in Wales, in Scotland, and in Ireland that will go over to the Norman conquests. Then we will develop over roughly around the same time, although with incidents going before, the Kingdom of Sicily and those counties that were there before the Kingdom of Sicily in Italy, including Malta and some other smaller areas on the south of the Mediterranean. And as you can see there, for example, and I've included it there in the map, the Normans had some territory in the north coast of Africa because of the area of Sicily and Malta and how they link together. Then, of course, from there, they will launch over to Antioch, the Holy Land, etc., etc. And we cannot forget, of course, how the Angevin Empire takes over half of France, as well as some other smaller developments, as you can see in Spain, because the kingdom of the Canary Islands, which are property of Spain currently, and will not really become part of the Spanish kingdom until the Spanish Golden Age, as we've seen in the Golden Age of Spain, was originally partially taken over by the Normans. And that's why the French, when the Castilians arrived first, already had some colonies there, and why that's going to cause some, issues later on as we go over, as well as a very small principality in Spain, Tarragona, that had a fiefdom in there. So they had some connections through, well, a complicated legal issue that I will not bother you with right now, because it was quite short-lived in any case. But, well, anyway, so this is really the full extent of the Norman world, just so you can really grasp that. Now, let's start talking about those things that are shared across the Norman administration and government, because these things are true to all of those parts of the map we've been discussing, right? So I think it's fair to say the Normans had very complex systems for the general governance of anything. And that is a very clear way where we see the Norse influence. Particularly, I think those of you who did the the Vikings and their texts, you would realize how a lot of the law, for example, or the development of society and those moral codes of conduct are still very much part of Norman society and how they develop in this way. Now, something that we've commented already upon is that often their governance is actually achieved through compromise and cooperation. It's not just an iron fist and you will do as I say. There are ways in which they engage with their new conquered lands and with their neighbors to actually move things forward. Now, something that we know the Normans did very, very well, and that was actually very important, particularly in Sicily and in England, will be the development of Latin written records. The paper trail that the Normans left behind for their own political agendas is going to be super important and will allow us to understand them better, but also it will allow them to actually, understand themselves better and the new areas that they conquered. Think of, for example, the Doomsday Book, right? And that whole list of properties that are part of the new kingdom of England. And this, I think this process is what allows us to see the rise of, I guess, a kind of legal profession. At this moment in time in Europe, we still don't necessarily have legal professionals. A lot of these jobs are being done by monks, who at the end of the day are the ones who are, well educated in these subjects, or by nobles that have received very specialized education. But in this context, we're going to start seeing this kind of legal experts that become part of the system and of the policy making of the country. And as such, they also start having specialized administrators that will deal with very specific aspects of governance, even if it's something like tax collection, for the purpose of, again, having a more, I guess, well-equipped system. Now, a lot of the governance and administration that the Normans are going to do is also going to be based in the area of the household. So everything that the ruling families and the government do is all related to their own personal level of authority and their family. We will talk more about family in a moment, but it's really a manifestation, I guess, of their identity from that perspective, from the point of view of, the real implications. They will make very good use of their support network to establish their authority. And this doesn't just go to, direct family. We're talking extended family of, oh, I sent my cousin to marry someone over there. That gives me a way in to liaise with those people, to take advantage, to pull them in. They will be very good at pulling from those networks. And, well, in some ways, I guess that's also what allows them to be very mobile, because there is always somebody somewhere. So there is always somewhere you can go. And that's part of the reason why, for example, by the time the Norman conquest of England happens, there were already people from Normandy in the country. So I guess in some ways that the takeover was easier because of that, nix. Well, the one thing, though, that we need to be very clear about, and that perhaps I've not been terribly on point about it, is finance. Finance in the world of the Normans was 100% predatory finance, meaning that they really extract wealth from the people for public good, but often it was really to influence their own wealth. They have a funny way, the Normans, of making what works for the people work for themselves. Which, at the same time is good for the people, but it always meant that their coffers were very, very well full. And that's the reason why we see so many new taxes, so many ways of, incentivizing that capital gain in many ways. But yeah, I don't think many other cultures at the time had that sort of idea ingrained in their societies. A lot of the financial systems that they will use in this case are directly borrowed or inherited from the Carolingians. So not so much the Norse influence anymore, but that of their neighbors, of course. And well, that is also one of the reasons why knights in this society work so well. Knights did not just have the right to be, military people. They had obligations and duties that they needed to perform, as well as privileges, of course. You take with one hand and you give with the other. But as a result, this creates a very interesting legal framework and development that will really start pushing some of the, I guess, preconceptions that we have on Europe at the time. And it will be through this sort of procurement at the top level that then starts filtering as to how it gets exercised on the ground, that we start seeing, perhaps for the very first time in Europe since Roman times, maybe, proper limits to authority. The Normans are going to start being very, very careful as to what someone should be able to do and not do, and over what they have influence and what they don't. And that in part comes from the very foundation of Normandy, right? The rules around how this new county was going to be operating were very precise and to the point. It wasn't just a matter of, here you have some land, go use it. There were rules. So they kind of built their entire system around certain rules for the sake of, well, compliance, but also because remember, these Normans tend to be quite unruly and they have a tendency to rebellion. So you need to keep everybody in check. Simple. People like order. So they apply order. And as such, well, the legal practice really becomes an important aspect of this world in all places. And as we saw last week in Sicily, it will become really, really big for the administration of this huge kingdom. Well, I was mentioning that we were going to talk about family a bit more because aristocracy and family are pretty much one of the same. They go, together like jelly and peanut butter. And maybe more another metaphor would be more appropriate here, but that was the first thing that came to mind. And what we see here very clearly once again is that individual families start making a name for themselves. So perhaps there is a degree of individualism, maybe relatable to our modern day society, because we don't see like overarching Norman agenda sometimes. Sometimes it's down to these people want this and this other family wants that, and they start working towards achieving that through their own means. Remember the Hotevilles, right? How the entire kingdom of Sicily and Italy becomes literally just the kind of the dream and hard work of just one people that left their original Normandy, or how it is really the dream of William the Conqueror and his own achievements and use of the system that gives into England. But not just that. Think about all of those crusaders, how some families of Normans would be renowned because of their military prowess purely just from crusading. So, I mean, these people are not a monolith. There is a lot of different varieties to the same thing, and that's important to recognize. Like I was mentioning earlier, in the case of Normandy and England, the cross-channel connections are honestly so important because that's what's going to allow the flow of so many influences, people, ideas, money, troops, etc., over a very long period of time. It was very, very common and still is in this day and age to see French surnames, Norman surnames in the English nobility and in their properties here in the UK and back in France. And they still hold those together. The impact has really, really gone really beyond their lifetime. And it's sometimes something we don't necessarily realize, like why are noble families in this day and age, few as still exist, or royal families, why is it that they have property here, there, and everywhere? Well, because these connections across their different lands is what allows them to keep a degree of consistency and control. And this is always done through family ties. Doesn't have to be your mother, doesn't have to be your father. It can be your sixth cousin removed over on your however many sides. But it's a connection and it means everything because you simply don't know how history can go, right? Well, as a result, I think in some ways, some of these families will develop also their own identity, which makes it a bit harder for us to find like a more unified core as to what it is to be Norman. But this is also that we see represented in the histories of the time. But more on that in just one moment. I have a slide just about primary sources in just a few seconds. Because of that, and their individualistic agenda, these properties that I'm mentioning, whether they are territories, castles, villages, whatever, are pretty much going to be like their signature. It's going to be the way they control what they have, landscape, people, etc., etc. Their land, their property, is a symbol of identity. And within that, the castle is really the top of that because of the implications that it has in warfare and the role that warfare has for Norman society overall, regardless of which territory. But modern warfare in just a second. Now, overall, we know that in the vast majority of Norman families and the ruling dynasty, it was a patriarchy. Men were the head of the family, and everyone else sort of followed suit. And there is a huge, huge emphasis, particularly for the men of each family, in warfare because of that militaristic society and because of their chivalry and, well, knightly traditions. It's going to be very important that we think about that. Why did they have better armies? Because they were actively incorporating warfare into their ordinary way of life rather than the other way around, like many other nations and cultures at the time did. Now, one issue that will be very reflective of this patriarchal system is the very restrictive inheritance. Everything will always go to the firstborn. And that's how we end up with issues like the Hotevilles. Hi, my name is Tancred. I have 2 kids, 12 kids even. Apart from the first one, the other, 11 need to find land somewhere else, need to find another way of subsisting and surviving. And that's also what in many occasions is going to lead us to these rebellions and this infighting between brothers, because they know that whatever they grab is is only as good as what they make it in terms of law, and inheritance is pretty terminal in that regards. So, there are benefits to the way they do things. There are some drawbacks. And this is perhaps, I would say, in some ways, very much still residual of Norse society. Not just Norse society, but most Germanic societies at the time considered that, part of what we call the Viking Age or the Viking worlds, as I've come to call them, happens because of a lack of land in third, fourth, and however many sons. At the end of the day, people needed a way of subsist, and they needed to expand whatever way expansion could mean, whether it was the land next to you or farther away. It was a means to survival. Now, I've not really spoken a lot about women, and you know that I like giving special due diligence to women in pretty much anything that I do, because, well, the history of women is still being written and rewritten, and the Norman society will produce very important women. However, a lot of the women that are important in the main narrative in terms of kings and queens were not actually Norman of descent. They buy into the family through marriage. So I wanted to highlight a few of them who were Norman born and bred, and that perhaps we haven't spoken much about. Some of them we have, like for example, Emma of Normandy. But overall, the women of Norman families were crucial for their overall agenda because of that support network, of that connections. A lot of women ended up going to church institutions, nunneries, things like that, which was also a very important way of establishing their power beyond traditional administration. Because, well, remember, religion and politics at this moment in time are also very closely knit. And, well, during the vast majority of their lifetime, women in Norman society, more similarly to women elsewhere in Europe, really had the vast majority of their power through motherhood or widowhood. Their ability to create children that would have access to certain goods was what gave them power. Their ability to then, once they were widows, take control of their inheritance, husbands, families, whoever this may be, was also what gave them power. Otherwise, they were often pawns in a large game to play. But, they kept their own interests, whether it was through religion or otherwise, and they were very good at keeping and carrying the duties of their families throughout. So, a few examples of these women are, well, the one that you have right here, Emma of Normandy. Remember, she's the daughter of Duke Richard II. She's going to go over to England. She will marry Ethelred the Unready. With him, she will have Edward the Confessor. But when Ethelred dies, she and her children will have to seek refuge in Normandy for a little while. Then she will marry King Canute. And this is how then we have Harthacnut and the rest of that family that will then give us two different claims to the throne of England, through the Norman side and through the Norse side. Well, Emma herself actually left us behind a very important book, which is what you see here on the screen and what I've written then for you, the Encomium Emma Reginae. And this is essentially, an encomium is sort of like a collection of stories or tellings in honor of, in memory of. And it really goes to highlight that this woman wasn't just aware of the power that her marriages had, but she knew how she wanted to be remembered. That tells us something about her level of education, of awareness, of not just of her, but of her own lineage, which once again ties us in with the importance of that family and the fruits of their family. Very, very important for women of this moment in time to keep that sense of, agency or identity in some ways. Now, the others that I've put in here is probably the first time you've heard of them. Now, the first one is a woman called Rohese Giffard. Now, this is a list from Doomsday Book. It's not the one that corresponds with Rohese, because I was trying to find the specific one and I just kept on missing it. But we know of Rohese, who sometimes is referred to as Rose. It's kind of like the anglified version of the name. As a land holder in Doomsday Book, there are very few women in the Doomsday Book inquiry that are actually mentioned as, by name and surname, owners of this, and that. So I thought it would be an interesting, example of a woman that we know of. Now, why did Rohese own any land? Well, she was the daughter of a magnate in Upper Normandy, so no surprises there. And then she will marry someone who will be super important. She will marry Richard Fitzgilbert, and for those of you in the UK, Fitzgilbert de Clare, one of the most important lordly families of the south of England. They were lords of Sussex. And in fact, they still have a lot of property in the south of England. Well, this man at the time of the Norman conquest, who also came from a Norman family in Normandy that had quite a lot of money, he will be one of the wealthiest landowners in England at the time. So why did she have property that was at her name and not her husband's? We're not entirely sure. It's very likely that it was her dower. And that tells you something about the importance of women in the managing of things like this, because otherwise she would have just been given money or something else instead of land, if you see what I mean. Well, we have another one going now to Sicily, who is Sibilla of Conversano, perhaps one of my favorites in this story. Now, Sibilla is going to be the grandniece of Robert Guiscard, of course, and not happy with being the grandniece with, one of the big heroes we spoke about last week. She's going to go and marry Robert Curthose of Normandy, one of the kids of William the Conqueror. So, she was just a whoever, right? Well, this matrimony happens in quite peculiar circumstances. Remember that Robert Curthose is actually going to go over to the Holy Land on crusade, and he will meet Sibilla on his way there. He will become enamored with her because apparently she was ever so beautiful. And on his way back from the Holy Land in the year 1100, so literally at the turn of the 12th century, they will get married. And Sibylla will go with him over to Normandy. Well, this woman must have been an absolute bombshell because she's praised for her beauty, for her intelligence, for her kindness towards people. And we have very, very clear records that when Robert was away in other duties, crusading or otherwise, chroniclers, and I'm talking people writing things, other men, actually said that she ruled better than her husband. So we're talking of top-notch people here in that regards. And well, that's something that really highlights her to me, the fact that other people who normally keep women, on the sidelines said so many good things about her. She must have really been extraordinary. This painting, by the way, is from the 19th century. It's not contemporary, but it is from the 19th century. And then we have a saint, because I've been mentioning their importance in the church, but I haven't really gone into a lot of details. Well, this is Saint Rosalia, who is a very important saint in Italy, specifically in Sicily. She was from a noble Norman family in Sicily, and she will be known for her piety and her adoration to God. And because of this adoration to God, Rosalia one day decides that she's going to become a hermit, and she goes off to a cave in Mount Pellegrino. And apparently she was guided by two angels to this cave where she will remain for the rest of time, where she will die eventually. Well, it's not during Norman times specifically that she becomes super, super popular. She was, important, but her miracle will come through much later in time, in 1624. There's going to be a huge plague in the 17th century, not just in Italy, but there's going to be an outbreak of plague, of bubonic plague, of pestilence in the 17th century in different parts of Europe. And different ordinary members of society, a hunter, a farmer, etc., would go to try and seek refuge, and the saint would appear to them, and would not just appear to them, but she will actually perform a miracle that would stop the plague from affecting the people around Mont Pellegrino and surrounding areas. So as a result, she is a very popular saint in this part of the world, and in fact, during very, very surprisingly, or perhaps not, during the recent COVID pandemic, her popularity really went off the roof even more so. Now, during the Renaissance and Baroque periods in the area of Sicily and some other parts of Italy, we will have a big revival of her imagery. And what you see here is one of those paintings, again, from the 19th century. Well, we are now approaching the sort of halfway point of the tour, so let me put in the chat once again the link for the upcoming tours, as well as the donations that you can do through PayPal and Stripe to keep World Virtual Tours going. Well, we have not spoken about perhaps the most important aspect of Norman society that we've seen in all of their land, which is warfare. Now, this is the general dynamic of Norman knights, both on foot and on horseback, so you can get a better idea of the equipment. I think in many ways we can't and we will never be able to see the Normans without weapons, without being involved in a battle. And that's not just because of Hastings or Civitate. It's because that is what their purpose was to begin with. Remember this. How does Rollo gain access to Normandy? By being a mercenary and, kicking out other Norsemen, essentially. That's how this happens. How do the Normans first get invited over to Italy? By being military, by being mercenaries. How will they turn the fate of Europe in the Holy Land? By being crusaders. So it's a core part of their identity. The word Norman and warfare, that's it. It's even tighter than peanut butter and jelly. Someone think of something better, stronger. I don't know what can be stronger to, uphold than that. But that's it. Those two concepts are inseparable for sure. And the principles, the three principles on how they build this warfare are chivalry, their armies, and the castle. So let's start with chivalry. In chivalry, the image of the horse and being a knight is super important. There is a je ne sais quoi that is just associated with it, probably because horses have always been understood to be very noble creatures. So for a person to be able to have this relationship with a horse, I guess you kind of have to have some of that nobility yourself. Not nobility in terms of status, but of honor within yourself. Now, due to this chivalry, the Normans are gonna develop certain codes of conduct, which once again derives from that idea of the legality side of things, of how to behave. They are gonna become praised, emphasized by the vast majority of their contemporaries in Western Europe, which enhances their prestige, right? If your contemporaries, admittedly in some cases your enemies, are still praising you, you may be doing something right. It's common sense, right? And one thing we know very well from the Normans, and we have lots of sources that confirm this, is that particularly to other knights, to other members of the nobility, and not just, in war, if they captured people, they were happy to ransom. They were not necessarily executing their rivals. The exchange of hostages is primordial in diplomatic negotiations between the Normans and others. And that is actually how a lot of the wars in the south of England during the Norman conquest and beyond will actually be fought and won, not by necessarily having to fight, but simply by exchanging people and ensuring the peace. This is very, very crucial. And this says a lot of them, because if you can exchange people and you guarantee their survival, then obviously it's different than if you just go killing and mistreating them, right? So there is this moral dimension to their war making. They feel that they have to do good by the sword, and that's not something that happens all the time on war, because remember the saying, all is fair in love and war. The Normans did not necessarily believe that. They truly wholeheartedly believed that there was a right way of doing warfare and a not so good one. Well, now, something else that is important about these Normans is their armies. And one thing that we know, and we have plenty of evidence, particularly as we see in the Bayeux Tapestry, is cavalry, cavalry, cavalry. Why? Well, cavalry against infantry, unless you have the right type of weapon, unless you have the right formation, it can be devastating. Cavalry allows you to move faster when you are in war as well. They have lots of leverage. It really adds a whole new dimension to how an army works when you have cavalry involved in the process. And to this cavalry, you need to add constant military training, because there was proper training, like I said, being given to these soldiers. You would go hunting, you would follow drills. Your group of knights would be kind of like a band of brothers. You would do everything with them, you would fight with them, you would train with them. And when you work that way, so close with the person that is right next to you in battle, we know this through different armies over time, you're simply that much more effective, because you know you can rely on the other person. You know that the other person is going to behave in a specific way. And thus, it's like a well-oiled machine. And unfortunately, not every single army in Europe, before or after, actually followed this pattern, which really played to their advantage. And that is what will allow them to develop certain tactics that they become very well known for. I think you may remember that I mentioned in the Battle of Hastings, there is this retreat that happens at one given point. The Norman cavalry feigns and the Saxons pursue. And then it will be that turnaround of the cavalry that will actually be quite decisive in the victory. Those kind of, feints, retreats, side maneuvers, you can only perform them if everybody is on board. And those are proven tactics. You have to have drilled them many times for them to work, essentially. It's not something other armies would, because they didn't necessarily dedicate money or resources to this. And we also know that the Normans were very, very focused on leadership. You couldn't just have good troops. You needed your leaders to be on point. That's the reason why, for example, Robert Guiscard, being known as Guiscard, the cunning one, the weasel, is so telling of what these people were up to, leading by example, 100%. And well, finally, the castle. So the Norman castle, like I've said many times, is a super important aspect of their identity as families and as military. Because remember, at this moment in time in history, pitched battles are not very frequent. We have this Hollywood idea that they were everywhere, but no, people didn't want to die. And going to battle, no matter how many horses, weapons, and armor you would have, was a pretty high chance that you would not make it over to the other side. So sieges were very important, and as such, castles were very important. Well, this is a typical castle from Norman times. This is what we call the motte and bailey. And the idea behind the motte and bailey is the following. You have an elevated area that can either be a natural elevated area, like say a hill, or something that you construct through earthworks. At the top, you have keep, and then at the bottom, you have the bailey, which is where you have all of the outbuildings, you know, the barracks, the stables, etc., etc. Well, in the case of the Normans, they didn't just have this construction. They would often create their keeps, what we call the donjon, out of stone. They were stonemasons, and this would be, well, crucial for their development. And here you have an example from Normandy. This is a Chateau Guisard, which is actually interesting because instead of having a traditional square shape, it's octagonal, which in some cases can be beneficial for the protection of dead points in a wall, for example. But you know, this castle wouldn't just be a matter of protecting the area in case of a confrontation. They also serve other administration purposes like tax collection, supply administration, control of the people and the land. So I cannot really emphasize how important those castles were for the Normans. They are central to all of their military campaigns, and as a result, they will also be amongst the pioneers in Europe at this moment in time to develop counter siege warfare. Because they knew castles best, they knew what they needed to use to protect themselves or how to assail castles more efficiently. Well, this is another example. This is from Italy. Again, as you can see, slightly different variation, but the same idea. And this is in Carcassonne, I believe. No, in Cacamona, sorry. So, as a result, the castle and the Norman world, again, are like this. So, I guess now that we've seen the different aspects of Norman life and their society, maybe you have different ideas of what the Normans may be or what Norman identity could be. Now, before I open the chat, just very quickly, or actually, I will open the chat now in case you have questions about these sources you can ask. So let me do that. So chat is open and I will continue with the sources. So I said I was going to do an overview of sources, right? These are primary sources about the Normans, meaning these are sources that were written during the 10th to 12th century about the Normans. It's quite a fair few of them. They don't all cover the same things. I'll give a quick indication of what each of them are. So for the history of Normans from the point of view of Normandy, from the area of Rollo onwards, Dudo of Saint-Quentin. That's it. William of Poitiers is mostly going to be writing on behalf of William the Conqueror. And so it's going to give us a perspective both from Normandy and from England about how William and the events around William's life develops. I would say perhaps William of Jumiers and Orderic Vitalis have the most rounded sources about the Normans overall, very heavily involved in Normandy and England though. So because of that, I needed something that took us somewhere else. William of Malmesbury is mostly about the English side of the Normans, by the way. Then we have William of Apulia with the Gesta Roberti Guiscardi. Like I said, as you've seen here, a lot of these histories are very based on specific families or specific heroes. That's just part of the Norman propaganda. That's they needed to create this idea, right? They needed to legitimize themselves in a lot of situations and cases. And finally, if you want something that perhaps adds bits and pieces um, from all of the different sources, the collected edition by Elizabeth van Hoots. Elizabeth van Hoots is perhaps hands down one of the best. Yeah, I'm not gonna regret saying this. One of the best Norman historians in the whole world. Period. So anything that she has written is absolute gold. But the Normans collection has God, I'll say it, essentially extracts from different sources of the Normans everywhere. That I think is probably a good way of introducing yourself to this if you don't necessarily know with which of these to start, if you see what I mean. So by picking up the collected edition of Van Houts, you can get bits and bobs from different parts of the Norman world and then think, oh, I like the style of, I don't know, William of Jumie or William of Apulia, and then go into that further. The castle was the castle of Cacamo, that is Caccamo, and that is in Sicily. And it's actually one of the best preserved castles of the Norman world, by the way. So um, that's the one. And finally, this is just a general overview of sources, secondary sources about the Normans, if you want to dig in further on your own to read. As usual, a few tips in here. So Alan Brown and Bates are pretty much the staple of Norman literature. If you can't find anything else, these guys were mostly at their peak in the 80s, 90s, and they've covered all the basics. I think Bates is a bit more readable than Brown, I'm not gonna lie. But overall, they are kind of like your starting point. Marjorie Chibnall is a fantastic historian. Period. If I had to single someone else out alongside with Elizabeth van Hoots, it would be Marjorie Chibnall, and her book The Normans, as of 2008, I think it was, or 2010 that it came out. It was the most comprehensive book out there of the history of the Normans throughout. There is, particularly in English, a very heavy, I guess, academic tendency of just seeing the Normans from the point of view of England, which is a bit limiting in that regards. Hager, the book of Norman rule in Normandy, is a very recent book. It came out in the last 5 years, and it's from the very specific perspective of Normandy. And I think the last one that I've mentioned is the best way of doing your crash course into the Norman Italy kind of things. Rethinking Norman Italy, the studies in honor of Graham Lode. In general, if you cannot find that, but you can find anything else by Graham Lode, he's kind of like the pioneer on those aspects of Norman Italy and their studies. And finally, for those of you who may be more interested about how the Normans saw themselves and their political propaganda, Albu, the Normans in their histories, that's what that one is about. But if you want more than just those, like I said, I have a 10-pager full of different books on the Normans on specific subjects, because some of them may be more related about warfare or whatever, but I think that's probably fair. And that is all we have time for today. So I'll catch up with the chat in just a moment. I'm just gonna put the links in there for the donations and the upcoming tours. I don't know if you have any questions. If so, let me check. Yes, so I've already answered the castle. That is Cacamo. So there you go. And yes, well, some tours may be familiar, some others have come out brand new. No worries, Susan. Thank you so much, and happy holidays as well to you and everyone else. So thank you so much for that. Being in the essay, we're lucky. Yes, Rochester Castle. very, very important. And Arundel, because Arundel was um, a Norman property to begin with. So, it's an important one as well. Clifford's Tower, yeah, it's a very, very classic example of Bottom Bailey. I feel I like the sword because you can see the moat very well made. Like it's very clearly a northern thing where they put the castle on top. And another one we have in the south of England, a bit farther down, in the southwest, is Corfe Castle, but it's mostly in ruins. However, the hill over the general scenario, it really gives you the idea as to why the Normans choose to settle there, at least in my opinion. No worries, Marian. Thank you so much. And yes, well, the churches and the cathedrals. Um, I've not gone as much in depth as I could have with religion because, well, essentially, once the religious institution gets settled in Normandy, it becomes a bit samey in England and in everywhere else. It's a matter of fighting for the main monolithic Catholic Church against others. But there are some interesting works, particularly from the point of view of architecture, of course, that have to do with the way the Normans developed Romanesque style and how, for example, that Romanesque architecture in southern Italy is, what is that? It's not Romanesque, it's something else altogether. So there you go. No worries, Linda. I'm glad that I've picked up your curiosity, and I'm so glad that you think so, Elaine. I'm a historian, so what am I going to say? But yes, history is so important, and hopefully it helps you all understand a bit better how some of these things, came to be. No worries, Steve. My pleasure, and I'm glad that you found that useful. And yes, well, it's Kakamo, the second one with the C, with double C. So it is really, really, really impressive. No worries. Oh, thank you guys. You're so amazing. Thank you. And like I said, if you have any further questions or anything that you may need help with between now and the interim period, I will also put my email here. You're always welcome to message me, like don't be shy. It's info@Travolution Tours. And well, that's always a place where you can find me for sure. Thank you so much, guys. Oh, and yes, like I said, do check the YouTube thing because it will not be there forever. And just as Ruth, exactly, the impact of the Normans is still visible in a lot of the countries where they interacted, not just through their architecture, but through place names quite often, I feel. But yes, Elaine, talk about church history next time. I think it would be a good idea. But I think maybe we would have to do like a series of talks on religion and how it advanced through the Middle Ages. So maybe that can be the next academy, the next academy talk. I would be quite happy to do that, actually. Just putting it out there. So there we go. And well, I think that's all we have time for today, guys. So this is this is it. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing screen now. I've put there one last time the links to all of the different bits and bobs so you can follow for the upcoming tours, and of course to keep on contributing to the way that World Virtual Tours does things. And that's all. Thank you so much for letting me rant about my crazy history, and I'll see you really soon. If I don't catch you before the end of the year or whatever, well, I hope that you have a lovely rest of the month. Whether you're celebrating or not, I hope you have an amazing time. And if we don't see each other before the new year, I hope that it's a blessed one. Take care, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day.